here with you in Faridabad, in Books and Beyond. And I look forward to a wonderful chat with you and through you with everybody.
Right now, India is dealing with the second wave of COVID. It's more deadly and fatal. How are you staying positive and maintaining your calm? What does your daily routine look like in COVID-19? Also, you have successfully launched a book during this deadly pandemic. So would you like to share your writing experience with our audience?
You know, we were all going through the terrible pain of this second pandemic. I feel deeply for the suffering of everybody, and I salute the courage of our doctors and nurses who are valiantly battling a health system that is being overwhelmed by almost 2.5 to 3 million new cases a week. I mean, no health system in the world can deal with such an onslaught of people, least of all our health system, which has never been the most robust as long as I remember. April 7th, done by Salman Khan as a great and gracious favor for me, and April 19th, when Priyanka launched the book for me virtually from London. In these 12 frightful days, the second pandemic came back with a vengeance, and we were launching a book in the middle of it. We had no choice. So in Maharashtra, all the bookstores closed down. Even online deliveries were not allowed initially. Now they've been allowed in many states, so at least people can buy books online. But it was extremely difficult to launch a book in the middle of a pandemic. But nevertheless, what it did was that I was able to make many appearances, like I'm doing with you on Zoom, and talk to people and try and convey what I've written and why they should be interested in my book. My book was actually born as a result of the pandemic when it first began. For years, I had been struggling very hard with how to write my book. I knew I had a great story. It was bursting to come out of me, but I wasn't sure how, because of various things. If I started in the beginning, it was too boring. If I started in the middle, the flashbacks were distractions. If I started with the end, I lost the climax. And I'd write 50 pages and say, I'm bored with my own book. I wanted to write a book that was unputdownable. So the question really was, what form of storytelling did I enjoy? These are the questions I started asking myself. And I realized I really enjoyed the short story form because even though I studied history honors at St. Stephen's, I was someone that read a lot of short stories. And I sort of instinctively figured out the craft and structure of short stories. So then I had this blinding epiphany. Why don't I write my book as a series of short stories, of some long short stories, some shorter stories, but as short stories which are complete in themselves and yet taken together become the totality of my life. And with that epiphany, and once I was clear, I wrote like a maniac. I mean, I'd get up at 5 a.m, make 2 cups of tea, sit down in the dark, listening to the chirping of birds and cawing of crows, and think about my next sentence, my next paragraph, my next, and just write. And the volcano of my pent-up book burst, and the lava just flowed like a river.
So, I mean, you've put it so wonderfully, and I'm so glad for the success of this book. And I would actually like to tell all my audience that it's a must read for everyone, and they should actually buy a copy right now and just read it. So now, coming to your book, in the beginning, you have mentioned that it's not easy to write of my life. Why do you say so? What kind of struggles did you face while writing this book? Also, what actually motivated you to write such a personal book about your professional and personal life?
You know, it's easy to write about your triumphs, your glories, the milestones you made, the things that made India proud. Those are the easy parts to write about. The hard part to write about is when you have to talk about things that caused you enormous emotional trauma, relationships that you hoped for but failed, divorces, um, uh, financial problems, bankruptcy, suicide of my son, um, the journey and the search for answers, um, the setbacks I faced even after astonishing successes in Europe. Those were hard things to write about because when you're a celebrity, you don't want to be seen uh, as someone who has lost a lot of things in life. Celebrities are supposed to be fairy tales. But I was clear that A, I wanted to tell my story. It was time to tell my story. Secondly, that I was not going to sugarcoat it. So writing it brought back many memories, along with many memories that I'd hoped to forget. But since they were part of my journey, I chose to write them too and share them with you too. I said, let the chips fall where they may. Let me tell my story in as real and authentic terms as I can, and let the audience decide, let the readers decide. Being able to write doesn't make you a writer. It is that dedication that you put in to write the book that gets it done. I asked Khushwant Singh, I said, how do you write so much? And he said, phone chak ke rakh deo. I said, phone chak ke naal kitaban thodi likhi jandi hain. You must have other things to do. Phone chakkan de alawa aur ki karna penda hai. So he said, you have to set out certain times. Yeah. You have to be sure that these many hours a day minimum you will write. So I did that. I created that structure and in fact exceeded that structure and wrote in a kind of fevered passion for 7 months before I had my first draft. And then when I had the first draft of the manuscript in my hand, it felt absolutely
amazing,
wonderful, overwhelming. Oh, it still needed revisions, it still needed fine-tuning, it still needed things to be checked. But I had a finished manuscript in my book, and I can't tell you the fulfillment of that feeling. It was just magnificent.
To my next question, interviewing the Beatles was your biggest achievement as a young reporter. I would like to tell my audience that in those days, Kabir Bedi was the only Indian reporter who managed to interview the Beatles, a popular music band who came to India in 1966. So would you like to share your experience of meeting your favorite band and how smartly you managed to get an interview?
The thing is, you have to understand the context. This was the 60s, and it was the middle of the 60s. And the 60s was a time of great social change. You know, the pill had been invented, hippies were all over the place, people were wearing psychedelic clothes, there was kind of liberation in the air. The whole social mood, the new bands like the Doors and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and the Pink Floyd and Simon and Garfunkel, I mean, all these were the sounds of the new age. And I was the biggest Beatle fan. And it so happened that I was working at that time with All India Radio. So when the Beatles came into town, I thought, my God, I've got to meet the Beatles. And then I thought, why don't I get All India Radio to commission me to go and interview the Beatles? So I went to my boss. I said, sir, I want to interview the Beatles. And they laughed at me. They said, you know, whole of Delhi press corps trying to get in. What are you going to do? I said, what does it cost you? Give me a tape recorder, give me the badge, and I'll go. So I pestered them, and like a child indulging, nagging, like a parent indulging a nagging child, they gave me the tape recorder, and off I went. And I went to the Oberoi Intercontinental where the Beatles had camped, and I sat in the lobby. I got in because I had a press badge. So, and everyone was looking for the Beatles. As a Beatles fan, I knew I had to reach their manager, Brian Epstein. He was the key. So while they were all looking for the Beatles, looking in the kitchen entrances, looking on the side, looking to see if they're trying to get away, I watched the lifts, and sure enough, he came down. I also knew that they had just come from Manila, where they had had a big problem with the government, because they were asked by the dictator of the Philippines, the Marcos family, to sing for their children's birthday. And they refused,
Yeah.
naturally. And this caused them to get very angry, and they were manhandled at the airport, they had to leave Manila in a hurry. So when I went to Brian Epstein, I said to him, I said, sir, I'm from All India Radio. It's a government radio station. The government has scheduled this interview. They must do the interview or there will be problems. I'm a big fan. I don't want to get them into problems with the government. I kept emphasizing government. So he said, the boys will not give an interview. I will give the bloody interview. That is good enough for me. Brian Epstein, hello, I'm thrilled. So I fixed a time to go to his room and made the arrangements with the manager who was with him. And I went up to his room. I knocked on his door and he opened it. He's wearing a bathrobe. He was sweating. He looked at me and said, oh, God, I can't do this now. And he slammed the door in my face. And I thought, bloody hell, I've lost it. So I knocked again, no answer. Knocked again, no answer. Knocked very hard and firmly. Suddenly he appeared. I thought this is the end of the world. But he had actually put on some trousers under his bathrobe, etc. And he walked me across the length of the floor to the other end of the floor, knocked on the door of the suite there. Paul McCartney on the door, and he said, boys, do me a favor, give this guy an interview. And I was in with the Beatles. And then, of course, what I said to them and what they said to me, and the feeling of being in Alice in Wonderland interviewing my gods, the Beatles, that's chronicled in my book, which you must read.
So my next question is, in your book, you have mentioned something very exciting and surprising about yourself. And I would like to quote here, not many people realize how shy I am. I'm not afraid of acting, but at times I'm tongue-tied in a room full of people. Has being shy ever come in your way of acting and success? Introverts are often misjudged as being arrogant and self-centered. I'm sure we have a lot of introverts in our audience today. So what's your message to them?
You know, I was an introvert, but I'm the kind of introvert where I have no problem if I have to speak to 5,000 people. I can be full of confidence. My thoughts are clear. What I want to say it, how I want to say it. I am performing. When I'm performing, I also have no problem because I know my scene. I know the craft of acting. I've done it from my school. I did at my college, St. Stephen's in Delhi. I acted with Yatrik, which was a very famous group in Delhi as well, run by Joy Michael. So I don't have that problem of being on stage because that again is kind of performing. But in a room full of people, I'm not the most social person. Do lots of little chit chat about small things and big things, etc. I kind of think people won't be interested in the serious topics that I want to raise. They just want largely entertainment. They largely want, jokes and or criticizing this or criticizing that. And my mind always is trying to think of all kinds of other things. Call it larger issues, but there is a natural hesitancy in me to speak in a room full of people. For those people that are introverts, let me say, there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. There's nothing wrong with being an introvert. It's a very beautiful thing in many ways because you reflect on things more. You measure what you say more carefully. Perhaps you don't say all the things you need to say, but it's not a bad thing. Where it is a bad thing is where it prevents you networking socially, being liked by groups of people. And there you have to extend yourself a bit. You have to take the risk of people liking or not liking what you think.
Great. I think everyone is going to follow this advice. So now coming to the most awaited question. You were the first Indian to play a major role in a Bond film. Tell us something about your experience with the James Bond films. Did it open any new doors for you? And how did it actually change your life?
Well, I got the James Bond film largely because I I had huge success in Europe with my Sandokan television series. So that, and the Bond film is the longest running film franchise in the world. They have hundreds of millions of Bond fans. So being in the Bond film suddenly gives you a fan base that is a worldwide fan base. And that's a very important recognition to have. Because the Sandokan series made me a big star in Europe and even in South America. But it hadn't hit the English-speaking countries. So both the James Bond film and my role in The Bold and Beautiful, which went on for a year, and that again has 300-400 million people watching it per day, gave me worldwide fan bases, which helped me get other roles in Hollywood, and also consolidated my position in Europe, and gave me really a career on 3 continents, from Bollywood to Hollywood to Europe.
Great, sir. Great to hear that. So, next question. Indian society has created a lot of boundaries and rules, especially for the girls. If someone is seen breaking these norms, he or she is judged and disliked. Regardless of these norms, you took a bold decision with Pratima, your first wife, from being in a live-in relationship to having an open marriage. What gave you the strength to follow your heart and not think about the society? Also, what's your message to today's rebellious kids and adults who are trying to find themselves in this complicated world?
You know, like I said, the 60s and 70s were times of great social turmoil. And the younger generation has a duty to shock the older generation. That's what they do. And we wanted to change a lot of the very rigid social norms of the time. So when Pratima and I started even living together, there were like magazine articles saying they live together. Today, people wouldn't even notice. But at that time, it was shocking. When Pratima and I got married, we didn't get married with the idea of having an open marriage. But there was a whole series of very important things that happened in our marriage, which I have chronicled in my book, which you must read to know what it is, because I cannot give you a heartbeat by heartbeat narration of what happened. Well, following your heart is good. Breaking norms, if it's something that needs to be changed, I think you should do that. Don't just break norms for the sake of breaking norms, because there's no point in that. Norms have been set up for a certain reason, but norms do get outmoded and outlive their usefulness, and those should be broken. But I would say to young people today that, the 2 biggest decisions you can take in life, one is who are you going to marry? And secondly, how are you going to make your living?
You have been unusually candid in sharing your emotional traumas, from 3 broken marriages to your son's death. The way you wrote about your son has truly made me realize the importance of love and family. Was it tough to relive those moments? How did you overcome and move on from such a huge loss? Also, what's your message to young people who are suffering from mental health issues, especially
The
in these
message
days?
to young people who are suffering from mental health issues in these days is um, do not be disheartened by reading about my son's suicide. The cures and treatments today are much better than what they were at that time. Our understanding of mental health issues has increased tremendously, so don't lose hope. I explored my battle to save my son from suicide, and I think it's a very important thing for people to read. Firstly, for a greater understanding of mental health issues, but also to understand that the caregivers suffer almost as much as the person who is afflicted. And that because they not only have to deal with the illness, they have to deal with the social stigma that comes with having somebody with mental problems in your house. They have to deal with trying to look after somebody who has changed within. The person that you're looking at is not the person that you knew. They have changed in some ways that you don't understand. And it is your love that makes you try and understand. And I think the importance is 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 never stop loving. Keep giving love, no matter what mental state they're in. They must be feel wanted, and they have to be reasoned with. But read my story, you'll know more. Of course, it was difficult for me to write that because I had to relive the entire experience of everything that I went through and try to remember what happened, when it happened, how it happened, what was the sequence of events, and yet tell it in a way that was interesting and write it in a way that held your interest. Otherwise, it could have become very boring. But the way I've written it, I think it has a certain dramatic tension to it, and yet you feel the heartbeat, my heartbeat and my son's heartbeat, as we go through that chapter. And it's very important that you read it to know what I really went through.
So I think it's also important to normalize taking help if you're facing mental issues, like professional,
Definitely.
right? On that note, film, television, theater, radio, you have done it all, and that too very successfully. You must have faced a lot of setbacks in your career. So, what motivated you to keep working hard despite these professional and emotional hurdles? What is your success
Well,
mantra?
when I did the Sandokan series in Europe, it broke every record. And yet, when I went to Hollywood, I had to start off as a newcomer. They didn't care that I was a big star in Europe. They didn't care that I had done a lot of Bollywood films. They didn't care. And they were, and it was very hard to break through in that. So beyond the Bond film, I had to fight for a lot of roles. I had to audition for a lot of roles, and I had to basically move beyond being an Indian because, firstly, they won't cast me in American roles. There were enough Americans around. So when you face setbacks like that, you think, what can I do? So you try to put yourself in the other person's shoes and say, firstly, they're not obliged to write roles for me. Secondly, what do I represent to them? I represent the foreigner, not necessarily the Indian. So told my agents, any role that is foreign or foreign sounding, put me in it. And therefore, I was cast as Tuareg tribesman opposite Michael Caine in Ashanti. I was cast as Prince Omar, a Moroccan prince, in The Bold and Beautiful opposite Hunter Tylo. I played all kinds of nationalities. And you basically have to think, when you have a setback like that, how can you make your way back? What are your strengths?
Right.
We know certain weaknesses got you there. You have to take control of the negative thoughts that come into your mind and just say, there's time and place for you. I accept. Not right now. Right now, I need to generate as much positivity, as much energy as I can, because I'm fighting a battle for survival.
So my last question for the day. Would you like to share any 3 takeaways from your book, Stories I Must Tell? Also, any message to your fans?
The first takeaway from my book is you can take the path less traveled and make your life a very interesting life. It may not always have all the success you want, but it will give you great fulfillment and it will give you a great sense of achievement if you do succeed. But you will never regret not having taken that risk because it will give you rewards in some wonderful ways. So never be afraid of the path less trodden, is my first takeaway. My second takeaway is that never let setbacks overcome you. Find ways of doing it, which I've already talked about. And the third thing is be less impulsive emotionally. Think a little more. However, let me say, all of us have regrets in our lives, but you can never let regrets run your life. What is in your hands is what you do from today onwards. And today is the first day of the rest of your life. So what you're going to do about it and how you're going to build it. Let that flow.
Right. Very well said, sir. I'm sure our audience is going to actually ponder upon this thought and, make some use out of it. And I would finally like to thank you for giving us the time and gracing our platform. It was a huge fan moment for me. We are
Thank you,
grateful
Ananya.
for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and experiences with our members. Your enthusiasm is contagious, and we hope you will visit our town, Faridabad, for a live session once the situation gets better.
I
Once,
wish you all success. I wish you all success with Books and Beyond and this wonderful group that you have assembled in Faridabad. Spread the light of books and knowledge and learning and growing and evolving with everyone. That's something very special that you are doing and all members of this group are doing. And I salute you all.
thank you so much for your kind words, sir. They actually mean a lot. So once again, I would like to urge my audience to get a copy of this wonderful read, which is so heartfelt. I would also like to take a minute to thank our partner and supporter, Imperial Auto Industries, and our wonderful members for being so patient with us today. Thank you once again.